Good morning. Lovely to be with you all again. Today, as you probably already know, is All Saints' Day. And we're going to hear what one of the biblical saints, St. Matthew, has to say about our attitudes. Now, we've heard a lot lately as to whether fitness centres or gymnasiums should stay open or be closed during these lockdown times. It's said that going to these places helps not just the physical, but the mind too. But what about the third element in keeping us fit and well? Because it's not just our physical shape that matters in life, it's also our spiritual state too, which incidentally helps the mind. And this is what our reading from Matthew's Gospel speaks about this morning. Jesus had not long called his first disciples to himself, leading them into an open space to teach, not just them, but some other crowds that had gathered also. And he begins to talk about the attitudes that he himself had displayed early on whilst being tempted for 40 days and nights in the wilderness by the devil. Fortunately for us, Jesus had the right attitude and overcame those temptations, telling the devil to get lost, quoting one of the 10 Commandments saying, "Worship the Lord your God and serve him only." If Jesus hadn't displayed the right attitude at that time, he may well have been tempted to do as the devil commanded him to do, and therefore we wouldn't be the people that we are today. And so Jesus led his disciples and a crowd that had gathered up to a hillside, which was placed on the west side of the Sea of Galilee. He sat down, as that was the way of teaching in those days, and he taught them the Beatitudes of faith. There are 9 attitudes which could be divided into 2 categories, the internal and the external, which ultimately teach us about moral and ethical living. I'm sure you will agree with me that none of us are squeaky clean. We all sin in one way or another, falling short of God's grace. But you know, God knows our frailties. That's why he sent Jesus in the first place, to turn this upside down world the right way up. He wants us to become more like Jesus in every way. And it's not easy to do that sometimes, is it? Paul tells us in his letters to fight the good fight, to keep praying, listening and learning. So here Jesus is speaking about our internal attitude, the spirit. Attitude 1 says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." This is how many of us come to Christ, when we recognize our poverty of spirit, our unbelief. And so this is the first step into the light of truth, of recognizing our condition before God. To be poor in spirit is more than to be humble. It's like comparing ourselves to the perfection of Jesus and seeing the truth and accepting it as truth. There are many things in this life that can bring us down, causing us to feel an emptiness inside. And so we search until we find it is only Jesus that can fill that emptiness. That well-known hymn, Amazing Grace, says, "I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Secondly, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Here, Jesus isn't talking about mourning the loss of a loved one. He's talking about us in our sinful state. And once we realize that we are in need of forgiveness, then mourning would signify a sadness of sorrow for what we have done in our past. It's like finding the key to happiness and realizing that you could have had it all along, which leads us into the third attitude. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Now the word meekness translates into gentleness. Being humble and submissive, God humbles the proud and exalts the meek, who have already come to the realization that we can't do things in our own strength. We need God in our lives to help us. Like Paul found out many a time when he was on his missions. He wrote in his letter to the Philippians, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." He totally relied upon God to equip him for all that lay ahead in his ministry. The fourth attitude says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness." This sort of follows meekness. For when we come to God in submission, we develop a spiritual hunger and thirst for what is right in God's eyes. We strive to be more Christ-like. You see, this is where the outward life changing begins. It's when others see the difference in us. How many of you have been told since you became a Christian that you have changed? I became a Christian in 1992, and my life turned around 180 degrees, and people noticed and told me so. And all who come to this place will, Jesus said, be satisfied, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So that concludes the internal attitudes. Now we turn to the external. Jesus says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy." Now Christmas is coming, as you know, and we'll probably be watching again one of Charles Dickens's classic novels turned into a film, which was called A Christmas Carol. One of the characters was called Ebenezer Scrooge, and how he changed from being a grumpy, grouchy old miser to a generous, charitable man. He learned what it was like to receive mercy and was then able to be merciful himself. Mercy is a vital ingredient in any relationship. I mean, can you imagine a marriage without mercy, or a church without mercy amongst its members? Showing mercy is the fruit of one who has seen his condition before God, grieved over it, meekly submitted to God, and came out hungry for what is right in God's eyes. That's why this blessing follows on the heels of the fourth attitude, to hunger and thirst for righteousness. Merciful are those who recognize the mercy of God shown to them, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The sixth attitude is, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God." To be pure is to be clean, innocent, and sincere. Jesus shows us through the scriptures that our vision of God is only clear when we have a pure heart. Moses had this purity, for when he came down from Mount Sinai, holding the tablet with the 10 Commandments written on it, we are told that his hair had changed to whiter than white. His face shone so much that he had to wear a veil because others could not look upon his brightness. On his journey, he had seen himself in spiritual poverty. He had grieved over his sins, meekly submitted to God, therefore developing a taste for righteousness, becoming merciful to others, and so God cleansed his heart and showed himself to him. We too need to change not only our actions, but our attitudes. If we do that, then we will see every situation we find ourselves in should change. Little things like correcting the cashier when he or she gives you too much change back. How many of you in the past have done that? Instead of walking out thinking how lucky you are, how many of you turned back and gave back? You see, our motives should change to a more service-orientated attitude towards others. You see, that cashier would have had to make good the shortfall in his or her till at the close of day. So we should become more compassionate and more charitable. When you have Jesus in your life, you find peace. More than that, it's time for you to help others find it too. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. Peace is something we all have to work at, isn't it? All too often we have seen this recently between governmental leaders over this COVID crisis and Brexit. Peace means putting the interest of others first, whether it's globally, at home, in church or the workplace, or a conflict of interest between different countries. All too often we see the peace in people's lives go by the wayside, because some people would rather have their own way than peace. James 4:1 says, "What causes fights and quarrels among you? It is because you want and you do not get." Peacemakers are God's children, and they endeavor to share the peace of God with others. Peacemakers enter the conflicts that darkness and sin bring into the lives of people. They work to build God's peace into volatile situations. But not everyone appreciates the peacemakers' work. There are many persecutors out there who don't see their own spiritual poverty and are offended when told the truth. Instead of mercy, they have a tolerance for sin. Instead of pure hearts that see God, they have wicked hearts that see only darkness. Instead of making peace with God, they persecute his children. Which brings us to Jesus' final beatitude with his final blessing. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. This is the defining mark of a Christian. Think about it. Christ was crucified for his righteousness, his beliefs, and down the ages others have been persecuted also. Again, James writes in James 1:12, "Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised for those who love him." When you are persecuted for Christ, you are on the right track. You are headed in the direction you have been called to go in. So where do we fit in? Are we poor in spirit? Are we mourning, meek, hungry, and thirsting after righteousness? Are we merciful, pure in heart, peacemakers? Are we persecuted for Christ's sake? If we are all of these things, then Jesus says that our reward will be in heaven, and it will be worth it. God thought so too. That's why he sent his one and only Son, Jesus, to be our sacrificial lamb upon the cross. Never be ashamed to proclaim the gospel of Christ. Amen. Stay safe. Take care. Bye for now.